I think unless you've spent some time on the ground as a laborer, learning that side of the business first, you really don't have a good, clear picture of what it's like to sit in that seat and be an operator.
This is the Construction Leading Edge podcast from ConstructionLeadingEdge.com and ConstructionBusinessAccelerator.com. My name's Todd DeWalt, and it's my job to help you eliminate chaos in your business and maximize profitability. This is the podcast for the construction business owner. And today I've got a great interview with a construction business owner. His name is Rob Lyttle. He runs a company in Michigan. He's going to talk about that in just a few minutes. But here's what you're going to get out of this interview. You're going to learn how a near failure in 2016 exposed some things that Rob and his brother and his dad really needed to see, and it turned out to be a good thing so that they could actually grow their business. You're going to learn some of the keys to running a family business from a guy who is in the middle of and has successfully grown a family business. You're going to learn the questions that he would ask you if you were a potential business owner. If you came up to Rob and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about starting a business," there's one question that Rob would ask you, and it's a good one. And then you're going to learn how there are no shortcuts in construction. Great interview. And I'm going to tell you about the series that this interview is going to be part of in just a few minutes. A couple of resources I want to get into your hands. First of all, if you own a construction business and you are busy, you have lots of work in backlog, you're bigger than you have ever been, maybe you're busier than you have ever been, you have more backlog than you ever had, but you're not making the money that you have in the past, or you're not making the money that you should, and it's very possible that you have profit bleeds. In fact, it is very likely that you have some profit bleeds. So I want to tell you about an event that I'm having that's going to be all about helping you drive your bottom line profitability. We're not going to talk about finding new customers. We're not going to talk about hiring more people. We're going to talk about how can you maximize the profitability of your operation without hiring more people and without finding more customers. So if you're interested in any of the following: triaging the profit bleeds that could be causing you to hemorrhage cash, uncovering the hidden opportunity costs that are hammering your bottom line. If you want to learn how to schedule for profit and reduce cycle times on your projects, if you want to maximize the productivity of your people by employing some leadership principles and strategies that came from the war on terror, or if you want to learn how to properly do what I call nailing the handoff to reduce mistakes, chaos, and rework, then you might want to check this out. It's the Advance. It's the Bottom Line Growth Conference, where you'll learn hacks and secrets for builders and contractors for driving your bottom line profitability. It's the Advance, a live event for construction business owners, April 2nd and 3rd, 2020, in Fort Myers, Florida. And you need to move quickly because the hotel room block that I've reserved is going away very soon, and you're going to want to grab your seat before the hotel rooms are gone and before the seats are gone. This is a pretty small event for construction business owners, so you can get all the details and grab your spot over at ConstructionBusinessAccelerator.com/advance. So that event is going to help you drive the bottom line profitability of your operation. But if you need more backlog, if you're not happy with the backlog you have, or you're on this roller coaster of having lots of work, not having enough work, or maybe you're wasting time with unqualified leads, dealing with a lot of tire kickers, you feel like you're in a race to the bottom on price, then there's a couple of mistakes that you probably want to avoid. And I put together a list of mistakes. I want to share two of the most common ones that I see. The first one is it's a speech impediment that I see a lot of people have, and it's saying the word "I" too much. When you're presenting a proposal, when you're talking to your prospect, don't say the word "I" so much. Don't talk about yourself. Your prospect doesn't want to talk about you. They don't want to talk about your company history. They don't want to hear how long you've been in business, how many employees you have, how deep your track hoe digs, how big your trucks are. They don't care about that stuff. They want to talk about them. Their favorite radio station is WIIFM. What's in it for me? All right. So Stop talking about you and start talking about them. And the other mistake is people are wasting way too much time on unqualified leads. They're giving estimates to leads instead of giving estimates to prospects. And there's a difference. And there's a process that a lead needs to go through to become a prospect. So I want to get something in your hands. First of all, I want to give a list of questions that you can ask your leads. It's going to help you qualify them, and it's going to start to help sell to the right part of their brain. Okay, there's a particular part of the brain that actually makes buying decisions, and chances are you're not talking to it. So start asking the right questions. Stop talking about you and start asking questions. And when you start asking the right questions, like you'll get on this list, it will talk to the right part of the brain. It will help them talk about themselves, and it's going to help you sell more work at higher margins. So first of all, you can get a list of 25 questions that will help you qualify leads and eliminate tire kickers. And number two, it's going to help talk to the right part of the brain. And then the second thing you're going to get on this page is I want to give you a free copy of my course that is how to build a healthy backlog of high margin work. So you can go to constructionbusinessaccelerator.com/backlog. Get those 25 questions. You can download those. You don't have to put your email address in or anything. And there's also an opportunity there. You can get a free copy of my course that I want to send out to you, how to build a healthy backlog of high margin work. That's at constructionbusinessaccelerator.com/backlog. So go grab that before that goes away. And then I mentioned that this interview is part of a series. Here's what I'm doing. I'm trying to help solve the perception problem that we have in the construction industry. Everybody knows we have a shortage of people. We need more people in the construction industry. And part of the problem, one of the root causes of that, is we have a perception problem. Young people don't see the construction industry as a good career. So I want to do a couple of things. One, I want to show people that you can have a great career in the construction industry. And then furthermore, you can also have a great business in the construction industry. And you can do that by starting and working your way up through the skilled trade. So I am putting together a series of interviews here on the podcast of people who have spent time in the trades and are now construction business owners. I'm going to put together a series of podcasts. The plan is to roll it up into a book and get it out there to help solve the perception problem. So if you fit that criteria, if you fit that description, if you've spent some time in the trades and you are now a construction business owner and you'd like to share your story, then I'd love to chat with you. Send me an email, todd@constructionleadingedge.com, and we'll talk about getting your story on the podcast and get it out there so we can help solve the perception problem. Now, let's get to that interview with Rob Lyttle. All right, Rob, thanks for being on the podcast. How are you doing today?
Doing good. How are you, Todd?
Awesome. I appreciate you doing this. I know we've been connected in my Facebook community for a while, so I appreciate you being willing to share your story. First of all, tell us a little bit about what kind of work you do, what part of the country you're in, and give us a little bit of information about your business.
Sure. So the company's called West Michigan Dirt Works. We're located in West Michigan. For people familiar with the area, we're in Muskegon, which is about 30 minutes northwest of Grand Rapids. Most of our work is in the underground infrastructure, excavation. We specialize in water and sewer work, road repair, reconstruction, mass grading, and we do some commercial site work as well. We've been in business since 2008. 3 partners, my dad, myself, and my brother. And primarily, just focusing on that underground infrastructure and construction side of things.
And approximately how many employees do you have?
Right now, we're running right around 20 to 25, depending on the time of year, and it fluctuates somewhat, but right around 20 to 25 employees.
Got it. And you started the business in 2008. That's a tough time to start a business, from what I hear. There was a little blip in the economy. Some stuff happened back then.
Yeah, it was an interesting time to start, and it's funny. A lot of people ask us about that and say that it was kind of crazy, but it was an odd time for us, and it was probably actually the best scenario that we could have really found ourselves in when we started. I was pretty young, both my brother and I. I was 23, and he had just turned 20. So we really didn't have the resources and probably the knowledge to take advantage of a booming economy anyways. So for us to be able to start out a little slow with a slow economy and grow with it was probably a blessing in disguise, really. But definitely a little unorthodox and probably a little scary too.
I've actually talked to quite a few people who started their business in 2008. And yeah, it's a little counterintuitive, but I've heard people say, hey, if you can start a business in that environment, it forces you to be disciplined. Whereas, like right now, here we are in 2020, the economy's booming. You really don't have to be that disciplined right now. In some cases, you just have to have a pulse to start a business, and that does
Very
not
true.
bode well for the next recession. So, tell us about what kind of work you were doing before you started your own business.
Yeah, so immediately leading up to starting the business, I was in sales. I was selling motorcycle accessories and parts at a small dealership in the area. I've been doing that for a couple of years. I did spend some time working in the construction industry just prior to that job. Spent a couple of years working for a bigger outfit in the same type of work we're doing now. Um, and that's kind of where sales side of things is kind of been my background. I still kind of do that for our business today. And then, just to kind of give everybody an understanding. So my brother was doing tool and die. He was kind of getting into that line of work, not really jiving with it a whole lot. And my dad, he comes from construction, so he was working for a bigger outfit. So we all kind of came from a little bit different paths, but me personally I was doing sales, so little different from construction.
Yeah, you mentioned you worked for a construction company prior to that. So, what kind of work did that company do, and what was your role there?
Yeah, I started out as a general laborer, just manning a shovel, working my way up as much as I could. It was a bigger company. The time I think they had around 120, 130 employees, so it was a little bigger outfit. And they did primarily underground infrastructure work as well. They did a lot of downtown city work, a little more intricate, some highway work and things like that. So I was pretty much starting out general labor. I worked my way up into being able to operate a little bit. So it got to be maybe what they consider skilled labor. Just was young, and it wasn't quite what I was looking for at the time. I liked the work. I just didn't really like the everything else that came along with it. I was in my teens, so it was the long hours and things like that weren't super appealing at the time, but definitely a good opportunity to learn.
Yeah, let's talk about when you made the decision to go into business with your brother and your dad. What was your number one biggest concern at that point before you decided to do that?
Yeah, I mean, when we did make the decision to do it, it was ultimately the biggest concern was whether or not we could pull it off. We could get enough work to pay our bills. I mean, we were young, so we didn't have tremendous bills or family to support, but we still had to make an income, and there was concern there as to whether or not there would be enough work to support it. And another aspect of it is starting going into business with a partner is historically not always the best way to go, anyways. And a family partner on top of that is definitely adds its complexities. So my brother and I never were we never got along great growing up. So this was a little unorthodox for us to be saying, "Hey, we're going to jump into business together." So that was a concern as well. Could we get along? Could we make this work? So that was definitely a concern too.
And how did you deal with that concern about going into business with your dad, maybe specifically your brother? Like, did you have conversations? Did you do some soul searching? Like, what did you do to get comfortable with that?
Well, we did. We had long conversations about it. My dad was going to stay. The whole plan when we started was he would stay working full time at his job. Financially, that would take less burden off the company starting out, and so it was really going to be my brother Mike and I, manning the ship essentially for the initial startup. And we talked about that a lot. I mean, we we had grown a little closer in those years, but still we weren't best buds. We didn't hang out. We had a lot of different interests. Um, and we did talk about it, and we had some rough patches in the early days, but ultimately we just decided it was in our best interest to put our differences aside and figure out how to make it work.
One of the things I believe to be true about business is you have to be good at dealing with conflict and confrontation. And in a family business, that like confrontation, that conflict has a whole other level of complexity. So what, how do you guys deal with that? How do you talk, talk to me about your approach to conflict, confrontation? What are some things that you found to be helpful, maybe even a requirement to make this thing work when it comes to conflict and confrontation?
Sure. Yeah. The biggest thing we learned early on was that we needed to understand that we weren't all going to be able to be good at everything, and we all had individual strengths and weaknesses. Because when we first started, we were kind of stepping on each other's toes a lot, and we were all trying to do everything together, and it wasn't a good recipe for success. I had a good background in sales, and I liked numbers and estimating and project management, so it was natural for me to kind of go down that road. My brother is more the finance guy, and we realized that he's good with money, he's smart, making sure that bills are being paid and we're not overspending. And my dad, from an operational standpoint, comes with years of knowledge. So it was important for us to understand early on that we weren't all going to be good at everything. Stay out of each other's way enough, trust each other enough to not constantly be looking over each of our shoulders and not trusting. Because yeah, you touched on something there. With family, you'll treat family differently. In some ways good and in some ways bad. You'll talk to family differently than you talk to a regular business partner or an employee. In some ways that's good, and in other ways you're brutally honest, which sometimes can be bad too. But we had our hurdles, but ultimately we've been able to figure out a way to let each other work and trust each other, and it's been interesting but fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. That's so true. Like, we can't all be good at everything, and we can't all do everything together. That's one thing that I see as a mistake, quite frankly, is that, as you said, people are stepping on each other's toes, where there's this 3 or 4-headed monster that's trying to do everything, and there's just a lot of wasted motion. So clearly defining roles and responsibilities is smart. And I would say it's mandatory if you want to build something that is going to grow. Otherwise, you'll just never get anywhere. So that's good stuff. A lot of people have misconceptions about being a business owner. So I'm curious, what was one thing that you believed about owning a business that you were surprised to find out wasn't true after you became a business owner?
Sure. And my background's a little different. So growing up, I had a lot of family that owned businesses, aunts and uncles, and I just grew up around business a lot. My mother owned a business through the 90s, and I just spent a lot of time around business owners. So I had what I feel like is a pretty good understanding. I wasn't the type that thought that, oh, this will be a gravy train. I can make my own hours and be my own boss, and I won't have to, this will be easy, right? So I really didn't go into it with that idea. But one thing I was surprised about when we started, I felt, and maybe this was because we were young too, but I felt like everybody would be out to get us. Nobody would want to see us succeed, especially other contractors in the area and things like that. And one thing that I was really surprised to find was that more times than not, even competitors, other construction companies in the area that we'd reach out to for advice or build relationships with, rent equipment or materials from, they were more often than not willing to help. And that was something that kind of surprised me. I thought everybody would be just, we're these new guys and we don't want to see them succeed. They're stealing our work and stuff. And certainly there are some contractors even to this day that maybe I wouldn't pick up the phone and call, but we do have a good relationship, and there was people right from day one that were very helpful with us. And they've all been down it. They've seen it before. It was a surprise to see that you could pick up the phone at times and just ask a question of a competitor, and and get an honest answer.
Hmm. Yeah, that's been my experience as well. And I'm surprised at the generosity of people, especially with potential competitors. But I think a lot of it is the generous people have been there. They've been hammered before. They've been through it, and if they can help somebody avoid some of that pain, maybe they'll do that. So that's good. I
Hmm.
appreciate you
Yeah.
sharing that. How has a failure or apparent failure set you up for later success? And maybe another way to ask that is, do you have a favorite failure of yours?
Sure. Yeah, actually, I'd lump 2016, the entire year, as a failure. To be honest, we had a really tough go of it in 2016, and quite frankly, it almost put us out of business. We learned a lot of lessons, and so I would probably lump that whole year as a whole into my favorite failure because of what we've been able to take and learn from that year. Um, uh, Specifically, it was almost a strategy flaw. Our idea going into 2016, we had a strong 15. We were growing pretty rapidly, and our idea was, look, there's so much work right now. The economy is starting to really gain some traction. It's time to grow. Let's do this. And the idea was, let's get a good backlog of work, make sure we have that, and then we'll head out to the job market and start finding staff. Equipment we'll rent or buy, lease. We got that handled, but the employees, that turned out to be our biggest mistake. So we got the work and found that finding the staff was not as easy as what we would have thought. I mean, maybe I don't know if the labor shortage was quite as defined then as it is now, but either way, we were naive to it, and we thought that we could get the work and find the people and be off and running. But soon into that year, we found that we made a really crucial error, and by probably mid-spring, most of the people that we had hired were either fired or they quit or some combination of the two. And we were left with a skeleton crew, a bunch of work, and we had to start increasing overtime, subcontracting work out. Expenses went through the roof. We didn't have good ways of tracking those expenses. And ultimately, at the end of the year, we were left with a huge deficit and scratching our heads, wondering, what's the next step? Do we file bankruptcy? Do we do we close the doors? I mean, how can we get through this? So what we've been able to learn from that is being that busy really exposed all of our weaknesses. We didn't have proper cost tracking measures. Our infrastructure, the company wasn't built up enough to support the growth. And I don't know that we would have learned that without that failure in 2016, without all of that going bad and exposing all of those weaknesses. I don't think we would have made as drastic of improvements as we did in 2017 and the years to follow. So, I mean, I don't ever want to live through something like that again. It was pretty brutal, but taking what we were able to learn from it, applying it to the 2017, 18, 19, and even today, we're not even the same company we were then. It's incredible how much we've grown. And so part of me is thankful that we experienced it. We made it through it. And we're here to talk about it, and now we're better off for it.
Yeah, that's a common, frankly, mistake I see a lot of people make, and I made the same mistake, is, hey, let's go scale up. Let's grow without infrastructure. Let's grow, and then we'll put the infrastructure in place when we need it. To the people who are thinking, like, I need to be growing my top line right now, taking on more work, then we'll figure out how to staff it, what would you tell them?
Yeah, that's exactly what we thought, and we had that same mindset. And you need to build that strong base first. The structure of your company, the infrastructure of your company needs to be rock solid before you try to build on top of that and scale. We learned that the hard way. You have to have your systems and procedures in place. Everything's got to be working like a smooth oil machine, and then you can start to scale and build. But until then, I would really strongly suggest, pumping the brakes a little bit, being patient, and just really working on refining your processes so that when you do decide to grow, everything's in place. It's easy to add at that point, and I shouldn't say easy, but easier, and it'll set you up for success.
Yep. Yep. Good advice. Tell me about somebody who's had a significant influence on your career and the business.
Sure. So when I was doing sales prior to starting West Michigan Dirt Works, the boss that I had at that dealership, I still have a great relationship with him today. He was a business owner that had owned a couple of businesses up to that point, kind of worked his way up through the ranks and um, would buy and sell businesses and still does that to this day. He's helped me tremendously. I consider him a real mentor. Um, his way of thinking, if I get stressed out and kind of spinning out of control a little bit, I can pick up the phone or send him an email, and he's got a way to get me back to level thinking, and usually has a different perspective on things that oftentimes is the right way I found. And especially going through 2016 and into 17, I needed that rock, that strong person I could go to, and that was the guy. And like I said, to this day, I'll still touch base with him, once a month or twice a month. I think it's important to have somebody like that in your corner, just somebody that's seeing your business from outside looking in. They may not have all the details, but they're smart, they know enough, and they have a good understanding of sound business. I think that's so important. And you think about it, every good athlete has a coach. It's important to have that, I think, as a business professional as well. You need that person that can steer you in the right direction when things get a little bit rocky.
Yeah, sometimes just having an interested, understanding, but objective third party who isn't so tied up with the details of the dumpster fire that they can say, like, all right, hold on, let's just look at this in perspective and let's not panic. I read a book about, he was an airborne ranger in Vietnam, and he was like this prototypical GI Joe type chiseled non-commissioned officer in Vietnam. And the guy writing the book was talking about him, and he said whenever the mortars would start coming in on their position in Vietnam, he had a couple of things. First, he would say, you and you go panic, all right? And then he would point to a couple of other guys and say, all right, now let's get some stuff done. And then he said, you always have time to put a piece of gum in. So he would put in a piece of gum. All right, now let's get to work. So let's just like panic. Let's not panic. Let's take some perspective and detach a little bit. But yeah, I think that's definitely it's a big help especially when you're going through a crisis, having somebody who's in your corner to say, all right, we're going to get through this. Here's what's going on. Let's not panic. Let's start talking about logical stuff. That's good advice.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree.
So speaking of advice, if you could go back and give 20-year-old Rob one piece of advice, what would that be?
Don't sweat the small stuff. When you're starting out, everything feels like a failure and a tragedy. Like, the littlest things, you feel like it's the end of the world. How are we going to get through this? This is nuts, And then you look back a couple years later at it and go, oh my gosh, why was I so worried? That was small potatoes compared to what we deal with now. And at the time, you really do feel like you don't know how you're going to possibly get through it, and a lot of weight on your shoulders. But if I could go back and tell myself anything, it would just be to try to stay grounded. Remember that you will get through it. Just keep grinding, and you don't. The problems that you'll be dealing with in 10 years are going to make these little ones now feel very minuscule.
That's pretty encouraging. Like, it's just going to get worse from here, so enjoy it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's just keeping a level head through all those, and because you can almost panic yourself into making some bad mistakes, and just making sure that you're thinking clearly and don't get too worked up. It'll all work itself out if you just keep pushing.
Yeah, I remember on the very first project I was on out of college, the senior project executive who'd been with the company like 20 years, he came into the trailer, and I was like working in the field, doing layout, running a couple of crews and working 12-hour days. And I remember he said something like, oh man, I remember back when I was a project engineer, life was easy. You didn't have the weight of the world on your shoulders. I was like, Dave, dude, I'm working my ass off here. What are you talking about? But looking back on it, like those were good days. At the
Right.
time, I thought it was stressful, but yeah, a few years later, I was like, man, I sometimes I wish I could just be back out there working with the tools on and doing layout and stuff like that. So that's good advice. Don't sweat the small stuff. Frankly, it's always going to be hard, right?
Right.
It,
Exactly. It's
it,
not easy, and yeah, it's never going to be easy. You're just going to learn as you go, and you'll have more tools to deal with the problems as they come up, and you have to get through all of that to develop those tools. You have to get through those hard times at first, and those small hurdles to build you up for what you're going to be dealing with later on.
yeah, it's the process. That's what it took me a long time to realize is the process is your friend because the process makes you better.
Very
Going
true.
going through those things makes you more useful, makes you more resilient, makes you better and more valuable. So yeah, when you're going through tough stuff, just tell yourself, this is making me better. Yeah. Um, More advice. What advice would you give to a smart, driven high school student who's about to enter the real world?
It depends on, to me at least, it depends on what that person is looking to do. I mean, if they have a clear direction on where they want to go, by all means, hit the ground running and go for it. But more times than not, it seems like as kids are getting out of school or getting to that point where they're nearing graduation, they don't really have an understanding of what they want. They haven't seen the real world yet, and the approach I took was slightly different. I was working more in my teenage years than not, and I tried a lot of different jobs, everything from restaurants to farms to factories. I spent a little bit of time in a lot of different things, and that helped me really understand what I wanted out of life and what direction I wanted to go. And I think that if more young adults, late teenage, early 20s, or just getting out of school, if they had an opportunity to maybe go out in the workforce for a year or two and just try different things, I think that would change their idea a little bit of what they want. And then if they decide at that point, look, I need to go to school, I need to get a degree, hopefully at that point, then they have a little more direction and a clear understanding of where they want to be and where they want to end up, and make smarter decisions.
Yeah, I have an 18-year-old son, and people are always asking kids. It seems like they're asking them younger and younger, what do you want to do when you get out of school? And they're asking third graders. My wife teaches third grade, and they're doing career readiness in third grade. That's kind of crazy to me. But what I think happens is people get an idea in their head, like, I want to be a fill in the blank. And after a few years, they forget about where that came from, but they get in that groove and they get on that track. And then they arrive there, and then they're like, this sucks. I don't like
Right.
this. Why am I here? Well, you got in this groove and you didn't really have a clear understanding of why you wanted to be there. So I think that's great advice. Get some exposure, see what the world's like, and look around before you get yourself stuck on a track that could take 1 to 4 years to get where you want to be. What is some advice that young people, let's say there's some 18, 19, 20 year olds listening to this podcast or hearing this, what is some advice you think they should ignore?
Well, this going back just a little bit further. I always remember this from school. I had a teacher, and I don't remember exactly what grade it was in. I believe it was middle school, but we were doing a report at the time, and it was probably even like elementary school now that I think about it. But it was, we had to write a report about what we wanted to be when we grew up. And most of the classmates were, they were writing how they wanted to be an astronaut or a doctor or veterinarian or something like that. And I wrote how I wanted to be a construction worker like my dad. And I was teacher made me redo it. She didn't. She asked me to strive for more, and that stuck with me forever. I think that all through school, at least my experience was that you're constantly being pushed to maybe not what you want to do, but what society thinks is great, right? Like these higher echelon jobs. You need this big education, And if I had to give any advice to somebody, as they're getting into their late teens, and some bad advice that I hear is, you have to go to college right away, right out of high school. You have to jump right into a college and get your gen eds out of the way first, and then you'll figure it out as you go. Well,